Nau mai, haere mai. Could I welcome you to our operations and monitoring meeting this afternoon? And we'll start with a karakia. He honore, he kororia ki te atua, he maungarongo ki te whenua, he whakaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa. Hanga e te atua, he nākau hau, ki roto, ki tēnā o mātou. Whakatongia tō wairua tapu, he awhina, he tohutuhu, e a mātou, he ako hoki i ngā mahi mō tēnei rā. Āmene. Now, our meeting is being live streamed today, and for the benefit of people who might happen to be watching, councillors are accessing their agendas through their iPads, and we'll need to keep looking at those devices. In terms of apologies, we have an apology for lateness from Mayor Hazelhurst as she travels back from the tangi. Do we have any other apologies? Thank you. Thank you. So that's an apology from Councillor Ollie for early departure. And in terms of leave of absence, do we have any requests for leave of absence? No, thank you. And just a reminder to members of conflicts of interest as they arise. And we have item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Could I have a mover and seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Sholom. Thank you, Councillor Dixon. I'll move. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Thank you. Carried. Now, item 4 is the Hawke's Bay Airport half-yearly report, and I will invite Chief Executive Mr Ainsley and Chief Financial Officer Rachel Orchard to come and give us a brief presentation. I understand they're on a time constraint. Yeah.
Kia ora, afternoon. Thanks for having us, and thanks for that introduction. Yeah, we are a little bit time constrained because we've got a meeting at 2 o'clock that we need to be back in Napier for. So what I wanted to do was just spend the next 15 minutes giving you an overview of our draft statement intent for financial year 2022 for the next 3 years, and hopefully we'll have a bit of time at the end to take some questions. So first I just wanted to touch on our strategic mission, vision, and our core strategic pillars. Obviously, with 2020 and the impacts of COVID-19, we've had to really rethink our sort of future, if you like. And I just wanted to point you to our vision statement, which is to be New Zealand's most vibrant and successful regional airport. We're mindful that there's a number of ways of measuring success, and we did previously have in there 1 million passengers by 2025, but clearly that's a lot harder to achieve now. If my memory serves me, I think in council last time round I was asked a question about that, and based on our high scenarios, 2030, we could actually still see 1 million passengers, but we need to be realistic in the environment we're in and work towards that. The other thing I just wanted to point out was around our mission statement was, really we're all about air services. That's our core business, but we see the airport through our property development and connect them with the rest of the region around things like bikes, buses, cars, etc. as enabling sustainable land transport services as well. So that's just a couple of key changes that we've made to our vision and mission statement. Looking ahead, I talked about this for some time, and obviously we've had a number of challenges with our terminal expansion over the last couple of years, but we're now weeks away from opening up to the public. at the end of May, give or take a few days. So we'll aim to get occupancy, and then we're looking to have a formal event around about mid to sort of late August, and we're in the process of looking at inviting dignitaries along to that. So we're planning a big event for the formal opening of the terminal. I just wanted to touch on some of the key SOI highlights, some of the things that we're focusing on over the next 3 years. We'll obviously complete our terminal expansion, and we'll swiftly move on. You know, airports get a lot of use and abuse, and one of our core responsibilities is to make sure that the quality of the facilities is kept up to standard. So we will be doing some major taxiway and apron upgrades. That isn't capacity, that is life cycle works. We'll be continuing to focus on our sustainable futures, working towards airport carbon accreditation, and a goal that we've set to work towards an absolute net zero target for scope 1 and 2 carbon emissions by 2030, which is in line with what a lot of the other government agencies are doing now in setting those carbon zero targets. We'll also be continuing to build on our organisational capability, so we're looking at where we're heading now with property development. There's a possibility that we could be building a large solar farm, so we're looking at the capability there, and we'll continue to build on our ambassador programme. And as we build our capability around our airside operations, we'll be looking to buy a new fire truck to expand our fleet and add resilience there. We'll also be looking to drive a much greater focus on revenue and resilience through our property and our renewables portfolio. Our aim is to get to between 25 and 30% optimally in non-aeronautical revenue around the property and renewables. If we get there, and it's probably going to take us a number of years to get to that point, but if we get there, that will help us shore up things like expenses and buffer the effects of things like pandemics on our business. And the other thing that will be you'll see as a theme through our SOIs, we'll be starting to look at the development of land like surface movement assets, our car park, and just looking at some of the facilities that we need to unlock our property development aspirations. So I just wanted to touch a bit on the passenger numbers. I would say here that given where we were a year ago, where we were talking about posting, about a $1.5 million loss this SOI, I can report that we're pretty confident we're going to be getting close to a break even at the end of this financial year. So you'll see the pre-COVID forecasts on the yellow line on that graph, and the recovery coming back quite strong. Air New Zealand have put quite a bit of extra capacity on, and we're seeing, especially in the last month, quite high load factors. So I think we're enjoying a fairly rapid recovery. Just in terms of playing our part in the region, we've been thinking for quite a while that we want to work out how we can play that much broader part in terms of the regional economic development. So obviously in the next 5 years, airline attraction, although it's a hard market, is something that we continue to work on. We are working on developing some routes with a smaller airline with jet services, and we're hopeful that might transpire in the next few months. Passenger services, car park to gate, continuing to look at that whole end-to-end process. So making sure that people can use our car parks well, they've got good facilities and amenity. And we're very conscious that over the last 2 years, as we've worked through pretty much a big construction site on our airport, that the passenger patience, regular users starts to erode. We have been doing for the last 18 months an airport service quality, and we do about 700 customer surveys every year. So we'll continue to do that, and we'll be able to report back on how we can continue to improve our service quality. We've also started doing some work on understanding how across aero, property and renewables we can drive, you know, the regional impact and work more closely with the region around things like property development partnerships, and how things like our solar farm can open up investment and partnering opportunities for the region. So I've talked quite a bit about the property development. 223 hectares of land, which for the last 5 years the airport has predominantly focused around that 10 to 11 hectares of property development as you come in off Watchman Road. We've worked through our master plan process, and we believe that in the mid to long term we've got probably around 70 hectares of land that we could develop for aeronautical commercial property development. Obviously we're mindful of the work that's been done on the regional industrial land use, and we're very eager to work in alignment with that. So working where we can create synergies in terms of property development, and not forgetting our core purpose as an airport and a transport and freight logistics facility. So on that basis, we've continued to work around our precinct property plans. So in that stage 1 area on that plan, in the next month we will be starting to put out some property collateral to show what those precincts look like, the tone of them, and that will help us start a much broader engagement with our council shareholders and with the community in general. Stage 2 and 3 are a bit more aspirational, and you'll see the solar farm laid out on the plan there, and that's something that we're getting close to the next stage of business case decision making on. So these are some of the things that we'll be focusing on over the coming years around our property. We believe we have an opportunity to look at the quality, the green quality of the property stock that we develop, so that can be something that's a point of difference for the airport. So we'll be looking at the development guidelines around that. I think on the end of April, actually, I think it's the 30th April and the 1st of May, you'll note that we had the information sessions coming up for our master plan, so we had to defer those because of COVID. But we'll be having open public information sessions over 2 days, opening that up so that we can let people know what we're planning to do with property, impacts and noise, our terminal and airside infrastructure. And I've already highlighted that we want to work closely with our regional partners to drive the property development. Just wanted to talk a little bit about this net zero goal. We have already got a fairly detailed decarbonisation plan that we're starting to slowly step through. So this is all about everything that we do moving forward, what we build, how we operate, starting to think about the carbon effect of that. We were proud recently to achieve level 2 carbon accreditation, which is the global certification scheme. But where we want to get to is that carbon neutrality stage. So as we step through that, the journey becomes that little bit more challenging. But our solar farm is a big component of driving that carbon neutrality for the airport. So just wanted to dwell a little on the solar farm. So we've looked at a solar farm scale of something between 10 to 20 megawatts. We're looking at a commercial grade solar farm that we've built a structure where we can potentially invite other investment partners to the table. And we've been talking to a number of regional partners around how we do that. So I think in the coming weeks we should be at the next step where we decide whether or not we're ready to move forward with like a resource consent and looking at power purchase, off-takes and things like that. But we've done a lot of due diligence and built some strong partnerships, so we'll engage more around that once we get to that next step. And I'll just land on this slide, and then I'll maybe pass off over to Rachel, our Chief Financial Officer, who I hope some of you have met. I think, just wanted to start off by saying that a year ago we thought we were going to end the year on about 320,000 passengers, but we think we'll end the financial year probably about 100,000 passengers ahead of that. But you'll see as we step through the next couple of slides that the revenue forecast is much greater than we had anticipated last year. That's built on probably a few key factors. One was the airline consultation that we've stepped through that's given us a pretty solid basis we stepped forward, but also the strong COVID recovery that we've experienced and some of the commercial strategies that we've driven over the last year. So look, on that note, I'll hand over to you and you can talk us through the next couple of slides. Thank you.
Flip to the next one. So just looking at the P&L headlines for the SOI period and also the forecast for the end of this financial year, FY21. So we're looking at, as Stuart mentioned, finishing the year at about 411,000 passengers. The forecast revenue, we should actually just nudge the 6 million mark, or getting very close to it for this year, and almost break-even result, so for FY21. For the actual SOI period next year, it's a modest uplift in impact for year one, but then growing quite rapidly in years 2 and 3 of the SOI. And there's also a strong return of our EBITDA. You see there over FY22, 23, 24, and it's reaching our target EBITDA of the mid 50% range by the end of the SOI period. But probably one of the key things to note is the revenue uplift, which, as Stuart mentioned, doesn't align directly with the passenger increase, and that is because of the change to the Air New Zealand pricing, to the per passenger charge, and other work on commercial revenue streams. But it's probably just worth noting there that 10.5 million, that we finally hit the 10 million mark in FY24, and that's based off only 658,000 passengers. And the last time we did about 650,000 passengers was FY17, and in that year our revenue was 6.1 million. So we're looking at more than 4 million additional revenue off the same passenger number base. That's probably it for P&L. In terms of balance sheet headlines, well, our total assets peak at 64.8 million in a couple of months' time when the terminal building is complete. Also, so does our peak debt, of course, no surprises there, at 25.5 million. From there, the improving passenger numbers and improving returns obviously improves our cash flow and our ability to pay down debt. So over the coming SOI period, we're able to reduce the debt level quite significantly and quite quickly. Just add there, probably in terms of the balance sheet, that we do have continued support from our commercial financiers. We have had a recent increase in facility limits, and we now have full capacity to finish the terminal and to meet our reinstated capital expenditure program. So we don't expect to need to draw down on the shareholder loan facility. That was great, very grateful for last year, but hopefully we won't need to draw on that. So yeah, as I just mentioned then, we have been able to reinstate virtually all of our CapEx from pre-COVID. And as Stuart mentioned, the focus is on apron taxiway maintenance in the coming year, and then the fire appliance in the following year of the SOI. Amongst other things, there's placeholders in there aligned to the strategy, of course, around car park, roading and commercial property development in particular would be the other key items in there. The headlines really for the financials.
So that's pretty much all we were going to cover. Hopefully there's some questions relative to that. And I just wanted to go back to the point that Rachel made about the shareholder loan. We're really grateful at getting the support of the councils in that shareholder loan last year, but we're equally grateful that we probably won't need to draw down on it. And you can see that there's a much quicker recovery there than we talked about maybe 6 to 8 months ago. So we're really focused on that revenue resilience now, moving forward with our strategy. Well, thank you.
Thank you. We have some questions. Councillor Nixon.
Thank you. Yes, welcome everybody. Nice to see you again. I don't think I asked anything last time. It was hard to say anything at all. Yeah, there have been troubling times. Nobody could criticise you in any way for anything that might not have measured up to what you'd previously said. I think it applies to all of us. I've got 4 questions, I think, that I'd like to ask. The first, most about the statement of intent, but the first one, I'm just curious to know that I see you've utilised bank funding rather than the council's local government funding sources for the debt that you've raised. Is there a difference in interest rates? And if there is, yeah, roughly what does that mean, both in terms of the interest rates and the cost of the debt?
Just, I'll let Rachel answer that, but just before we go there, you're referring to LGF funding as opposed to the shareholder loan?
Your commercial funding versus
the shareholder loan.
Yeah.
Because you haven't used our
So
money.
yeah,
which is
there's
fine.
a definite advantage in interest rates. So
Yeah, yes,
I'll let
there is.
Rachel speak.
From what you've done or what you could have done?
So the shareholder loan is an amalgamation of the interest rate applied from the local councils and the Crown as well. And obviously our commercial funding streams are at current market rates.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a differential of about currently nearly 3% between the commercial rate and the shareholder loan rate. So it's advantageous to us to use the commercial facilities.
That sort of
where we can.
automatically raises the question, why did you go down that road instead of using the cheaper option, which was the one, unless I misunderstood what you've said?
No, that's a fair question. So just before the lockdown hit last year, we were in a very specific point in our negotiation with banks, commercial lenders, and COVID hit, and things that we thought were on the table got pulled off the table. So within months of that happening, we were able to go back to those lenders. But when you're facing down the barrel of do we shut down a terminal expansion or keep it going, we needed that strong guarantee from our shareholders that we had the liquidity to keep it going. Because around November, December last year, if our worst fears had been realised, we would have been faced with a liquidity challenge.
Yeah, I mean, what I was really after, I think Bruce has worked out what I'm asking.
But
I'm saying, how much does it cost you?
Funding is something that's quite of interest to us, and we have been talking to both council shareholders about the opportunity of working through that process. So
just through Madam Chair, just to clarify a point. So the commercial lending that the airport has got is cheaper than the shareholder funding lending that was provided. The main reason for that is the 2 Hawke's Bay councils provided their funding at 3.5%. The Crown provided their funding at 6.5%. So they were very generous in that capacity, which is why the company has decided to use commercial
Taking
terms.
is absolutely obvious, but I didn't appreciate those numbers, and so I'd come to the wrong conclusion.
had it been 2.5%, it might have been.
No, you don't have to explain it. Numbers stack up. Look, the second or third question I've got sort of relates to, and I'm looking at what on my agenda is page 41, and it's just some information you had, because the thing I wonder about is how well do you know your customers? I don't mean Air New Zealand, I mean the passengers that pass through the door. The first thing I saw is it said approximately 10%, well, this is movements, 10% of movements relate to international passengers inbound and outbound. Is that private? You're talking private jets there, or you're talking a measure of the customers going through?
That's a metre of the international travellers that are coming into the region through the airport. And about 70% of that 10% is probably coming from the eastern seaboard of Australia. So that's, I suppose the point there is there's a much, and that's why we talked about regional economic impact. We understand there's a much higher value of the international traveller to the region, but to the airport, it's a passenger coming through the terminal. So in the last year, we've obviously seen quite a high uptick in domestic travel.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think we've done a lot of forecasting and breakdown of different routes, so I think we do have a good understanding of what the composition of that is, but we're keen to see international travel open back up, because ultimately it's good for the region. You know.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, I saw the 10%, and the way you explained is what I first thought, then I changed my mind, thought you were saying something else. It's 10% seems quite low. I thought it would have been higher than that. But secondly, there's another piece there, and it talks about the, just got to find it quickly, the passenger numbers. Oh, I know. It's this paragraph that says passenger split is understood to be approximately 45% business, 35% leisure, and 20% visitors. Now, I don't want to grill you on that at the moment, but I just want to refer to that, because I think it's essential, really, that you have a really good understanding of who it is flying in and flying out. Are they locals? Are they outside people? Are they internationals? Why are they coming here? They're coming here on business, because the figure I saw for business, and I've lost it now, there it is, 45% business, I find extraordinarily high. And I'm sure I've seen figures for the overall Air New Zealand network that says business is only 15% or something of total passengers. So I guess the question I've got, but it doesn't have an answer now, is what exactly you're doing to try and improve your understanding of who's flying in, and so that we better understand, because as far as I'm concerned, the real purpose of the airport is actually not for the councils to make money. We don't make much anyway, but rather you're providing the lubricant.
Yeah, and thank you. That's exactly how we see it. I think the question about the demographics of passengers coming out and what they're doing is something that will factor in that regional economic impact review that we've done. The last one that we did was 2017. It's actually quite hard to extrapolate some of that information from various agencies to get a real touch on whether it's VFR or, you know, tourism or business. But I think Hawke's Bay does enjoy quite a lot of business travel, you know, up and down to the likes of Auckland and Christchurch and Wellington. So, yeah, it's definitely something we could better understand, and that's what we're working to this year, understand the demographics.
Yeah, thanks for the answer. You see the gist that I'm getting at. I'm sure you'll take it on board.
Yeah.
Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just very conscious of time. I have 4 questions. I'm going to ask them, but then I wonder if it's appropriate they're put to the board in email for an email response, if that's okay. So my questions are, what are the risks to the shareholders of these commercial precinct developments? Is the development there centric or based on the importance of air travel? And when does the shareholder loan facility cease? You might be able to answer that very quickly now. And what's the biggest risk you can see on the horizon? Because I bet your bottom dollar none of us said pandemic years ago. So can I just leave those as questions that we can come back to, or I'll send through by email? Thank you. I'll send them to you, Bruce, if that's all right. Thank you.
Thank you for that approach. Councillor Corbin.
I'm happy to add a question to Tanya's list, and it relates to the non-aeronautical revenue. You've given a target there of 25 to 30% revenue, but my question is, how does that relate to actual net margin? How much more profit's going to be driven from it, and how that relates to current net margin on aeronautical activity?
Thank you. And Councillor Sholem.
Thank you, and thank you to fellow councillors for taking the wind out of my sails. Questions I was also going to ask. Given time and whatnot, I'm very happy to move the recommendations.
Thank you. And do we have a seconder? Thank you. And just before I put that motion, Councillor Barber.
Hey, Kia ora. In terms of the uplift in the revenue going up the next 3 years, you talked about the change in the pricing to per passenger. Is that right across New Zealand? So we're all in airports kind of, was that a policy
No,
No, that was a specific renegotiation
Oh,
that we
okay.
carried out with Air New Zealand last year just for Hawke's Bay Airport.
Just all
but,
three.
but it's using a commercial model and principle recovery mechanism that most of the airports in New Zealand use. So it's a similar model. It's in simple terms, it's user pays for infrastructure and a return on capital. So
And it's a 5-year pricing agreement that we've put in place with Air New Zealand with annual reviews, just due to the uncertainty of passenger growth coming out of COVID. Got that annual review in there, but essentially there's an indicative price locked in for the coming 5 years.
Right,
but
well,
we're
it's,
possibly sitting in that sort of 70th percentile around where our pricing sits relative to the rest of the market. So we're not the lowest and we're not the highest.
thank you.
Thank you for that. I'm going to put that motion, those motions rather, from page 9. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, and we're going to be back in perfect time.
Thanks very much.
Right, moving on to item number 5, which is the Hawke's Bay Museums Trust Annual Report. I'd like to invite Dr. Grant to come forward, and I believe Mr. Allen's going to speak to the report.
I'll hand over to Dr. Grant. But yeah, I think, so this is actually the half-year report and the draft statement of intent as well. Same reporting cycle as the airport just previously. I think probably just acknowledging Dr. Grant will pick up on this as well, but the collaboration between the Museums Trust, Napier City Council and Hastings District Council on the review with the joint working group has been incredibly productive over the last year, and good progress is being made, particularly on the new storage site. So.
Good afternoon. Can people hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. It's nice to be back before the council and new councillors. Could I just pick up on what Bruce Allen has said and say that from the trust point of view, I should like to express our gratitude to the council, both councillors and staff, for the way in which you have approached the problems that the trust and the museum is facing, and the way in which you have worked with the trust to try and see our way through to making sure that this regional institution works in the way it should. So I do think that you do have to have some patience, because I'm sure this happens to councillors anyway, but things pop out of the woodwork occasionally with regard to the museum, and you're sitting there thinking that you've got the show on the road and everybody's on board, and all of a sudden something happens. And these things are sent to try us, but we are patient, and the trust is committed to working with you to make sure that we get the outcome we want. If I look at the statement of intent first, if you allow me, Madam Chair, this statement of intent is pretty much the same as the last statement of intent and the statement of intent before that. And this is deliberate. We have advised both you and Napier City Council that with the work going on in the joint working group, particularly the third phase of that work, which relates to the governance of the MTG, there is very little point in getting the trust to draw up a new whiz-bang SOI when 6 months down the track we may be coming to you with a different model of governance and completely different circumstances. So this is unchanged. It maintains the objectives of the trust. The expenditure commitments and outlook is very, very neutral. As you know, the trust itself doesn't have a great deal of money and doesn't spend a great deal of money. a lot of the money on our balance sheet is actually earmarked for specific purposes and cannot be used for general expenditure either on the museum or on supporting the council's work. That being said, at the last meeting 3 weeks ago, the trust did make a decision to invest $40,000 of its own revenue at the request of the HDC to support the ongoing work about the joint storage facility, which is in Queen Street. Now that is, by my recollection, the first time the trust has ever made a decision to pay either council anything. And I think it is, from our point of view, a very strong token of the confidence that we have in the work that is underway and in which the HDC has taken the lead. Otherwise, in terms of revenue, our revenue is pretty much affected by the interest rates because a lot of our money is held in cash at term deposit. And if you've looked at the figures, you'll see that sliding down. Other incidental sources of revenue relate to the koha that visitors pay to the museum when they walk in the door. And of course, that's been smacked for six first by COVID and now by the closure of the museum due to the repair work underway. And then thirdly, there's the sort of left field stuff of people who leave money to the trust. And that is just unpredictable. We haven't had any major grants in the last 2 years, but you never know, these things happen. I'm happy to take questions on the SOI. The financial statements are pretty straightforward. And again, Madam Chair, should people have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But could I reiterate for you, because I know that you do get reports on the Joint Working Group, I think the Joint Working Group is the best thing that's happened to the MTG for a long time. And if we can get there, the people of Hawke's Bay should be very satisfied that they have got an institution that works well, is governed well, and is funded transparently and clearly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Sholem.
Thank you, and thank you for your comments, particularly around the operations of the working group, and that those are positive. That's really great to hear that that's working well. With respect to the fact that you have adjusted for inflation within your SOI, and also taking into consideration that you are waiting to see what's happening with stage 3, I just really wanted to check to make sure that you believe that the funding levels are adequate for the trust to operate in the way that it needs to, especially in this strange environment we find ourselves in.
May I? Thank you. Yes, I mean, it's as you know, it's a very weird...
Can I get you to pop your mic back on?
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yes. I mean, the answer is yes. As you know, it's a fairly weird funding model. You guys give us money, we give it back to you. You say thank you very much, we say thank you very much, and the MTG moves on. So long as we have this model, and both Napier and Hastings share jointly in the costs, then the model works fine. If one or other of you says, hey, we're going to do something different or totally different, then the model doesn't work. We've had a few hiccups in the past, but in the end, we've got everybody back on the same treadmill. Where the museum is lacking, and this is obviously one of the objectives of reform, is the ability for the museum as an institution, let's say as a trust in its own right, to go out and raise funds to project the museum and to further the museum's work. At present, we cannot do that. And as you know, the trust is voluntary. I mean, our administrative costs are very small, but by the same token, we can't risk the trust money to go out and do a lot of things that a normal museum would do. But right now, in short, yes, we're fine. Thank you.
Thank you. May I ask a follow-up? Pending the completion of all that is happening at the moment, do you believe that the trust will then be in a better position to come back to council, both councils, with a model that would allow more promotion, like what you're talking about there, which at the moment you don't have the ability to do.
Yeah, I mean, the joint working group has sort of said there's a governance model out there we want to get to, and we haven't yet got into the weeds about it. But you're looking at a future where you're going to have a substantial institution in Napier, and you're going to have a substantial institution in Hastings, both being parts of the MTG. And that is a very exciting development. It's the first time it's happened. I mean, I remind you, in case you'd forgotten, that the MTG is the second oldest institution of its kind in the country. Only Nelson has a museum that is older. We are older than the Dominion Museum, the Auckland Museum, and everything else. And it's always been Napier focused, whereas it's a regional institution. So the future, from my point of view, from the trust point of view, is very exciting. And I think we can get there with goodwill and commitment.
Thank you.
Councillor Dixon.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dick, for your report, and thank you for your font of knowledge on that working group. I will also acknowledge as Chair that it is going exceptionally well, and the collegiality between all the councils and the Museum Trust is phenomenal. Just to really update people, there are some applications awaiting costs for fit-out that have been made at the moment, and our next, we'll find out the result of those in June, early July probably, and the governance group is working now on how it's going to be governed, Wendy. So that's part of the brief that you mentioned, is the way things are going to be governed, what their targets are. So I'm more than happy to move the recommendations. Chair.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Sears. And a further question from Councillor Barber.
Kia ora. Thank you for your report. I'm just looking at 3.3. Is George is he still our representative on the trust? And then I guess the follow-up question is, does that person have to be a councillor? And third question is, how do they link back to the council if they're not on the council? Yeah.
Through you, Madam Chair. So at the beginning of this triennium, former councillor was reappointed back on, I guess for the reasons being of his institutional knowledge within the trust and a willingness to continue as HTC's representation on that. So that'll be, it's a 3-yearly appointment normally, in line with the triennial appointments that are made. A good question about the reporting back process for council and as our representative on that trust. It's probably something we need to look at to do a bit more formally. So I'll take it on board.
Thank you. We had a mover and a seconder for those recommendations on page 57. I'll now put that motion, or those motions. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, moving to item 6, health and safety. Jenny. Right, okay.
Tēnā koutou, thank you for receiving this report. It has been a little while since we've had a report from me, so I do apologise for that in advance. So this report covers the first 2 quarters of the recent financial year, and it is a little bit more brief than reports we've received before. And as I've highlighted inside my report, this is partly due to COVID-19 and the interruptions from that, and also because we have a new report that is now available on the hub.
That's a monthly report which has more detail in it than previously reported. So some of the information that came in these reports is now available in that monthly report. So I'm happy to take any questions that you might have of me in relation to this report.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr.
Thanks, Jenny. When I look at 2.2 of your report, there's full safety observations, both with employee and contractor. Can you assure me that now that these have been identified, they have been educated and resolved, as opposed to just reported to us?
Through you, yes, absolutely. So everything that we report in here, we action on. So anything that we report that is fair or poor, that has some safety implications, we action immediately and act upon.
And is there an eye kept on that person or entity to make sure that the learning sticks?
Again, yes, absolutely. We follow up everything in our tracking system, electronic tracking system, with any actions there, making sure that we follow up in a few months just to make sure that those behaviours have been improved upon, or if they're still needing some assistance to get there. Yep.
Thank you. Councillor Sholom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for this report. It's always really thorough. I appreciate the extra reporting that's now available on the hub. Looking at the lagging indicators, I'm particularly interested in the EAP or mental health referrals. I see in this report there's been no significant spikes or anything like that. It seems to be tracking quarter to quarter. But I'm just conscious that, you know, this council has set out a really ambitious and probably increasingly so capital works program. There's a lot of pressure across all departments in council at the moment to deliver. Also, given council's decision to cap rates due to COVID, you know, that put increased financial pressure within the organisation, which limits intake of roles. I guess what I'm interested to understand is, how do we promote those services and encourage uptake?
Through you, Madam Chair. Absolutely important. It's one of our critical risks is around work-related stress and those mental health issues in the workplace. So about 2 years ago, when we reviewed everything, we recognised that we needed to do some promotion on that. So we've started a program. It's called our Māori Tū Māori Ora Wellbeing Program, and part of that program is access to a range of different support services that staff can access. And also part of that program, we implemented mandatory mental health matters training, which we partner with the Red Cross on. So all permanent staff at council receive that training, and then the refreshers subsequently. And that has had a big impact upon staff being able to understand where to go to for help, how to get help. And the follow-up from that. So part of that also was the need to report on the mental health referrals so that the leadership team and you as elected members are aware of the trends in that space, so that you can see that we are doing our very best to work and manage those risks, but they are definitely a risk to the business. Yeah.
And if I can just add, Madam Chair, not to get down to too much detail, but the mental health matters has been really good at helping people help or notice others. So it's not just relying on oneself to recognise that some help might be needed, but it's been quite good in helping others to help others.
I'm thrilled to hear that last bit, because I recognise that Kiwis are often detrimentally stoic. So it's really great to hear that we're trying to build that culture of helping your colleagues identify as well as self-identification. Okay, thank you. I'm going to continue asking about that when you report back to us in the future, just so you're aware. Thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just looking at the number of mental health referrals. Yeah, I find that really alarming myself. You can see a broken leg, a broken arm, but you can't see a broken heart. So where are they referred to? What actually happens there?
Through you, Madam Chair. So we have a number of different places we can refer people to. So there's a couple of different options for staff. They can self-refer through a employee assistance program, and that's so they can have if they want to be anonymous and they want to get help without coming to see us, they can go that way. But a number of staff come to see me or my team, and then we will sit down with them and sort of triage who would be good to see. We've got relationships with a number of different mental health providers, budget support groups, doctors, because not everyone is solved through counselling. Some people it's actually a financial situation, and so things like getting them budget advice then takes that stress away, or for others it's actually health conditions that they need to see their GP about. So we've put in place that through the Mori Tu Mori Ora program, all those different streams of help so that we can actually target it for the individual rather than just off you go to this place and it's a one-stop shop. So that's been a big part of that change and the way that we work through in that wellbeing space.
Just one more question, Madam Chair. Is there ethnicity taken into account, like they would, Māori, you go to a Māori, or is that considered at all? Is that their preference, that kind?
Absolutely, and that's part of that, finding the right thing for the person, just like we would for gender as well, because some people aren't comfortable going to see people of different gender or ethnicity, or they want specifically to see someone of that. It's really important that they get the right fit for them, and it's the religious beliefs as well. So there's a whole lot of things that we consider as part of that.
Yeah, and sometimes it doesn't work first off, and we find someone else.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. I think Councillor Sholem picked up on a really important piece. I love the answer, but to me the councillors themselves as people were also missing. So through Madam Chair, I'd like to recommend that there was a workshop and sharing of information so we can learn and support each other and know what's available as well. Because I can ask a whole lot more questions here today, but I think would be better addressed in a workshop, if that's appropriate.
Are you speaking about a health and safety workshop, or are you particularly referring to mental health issues?
I'm referring to what support is out there available for the staff, but also what's available for us, how we can, I guess the learning that has been undertaken in a staff regime, I actually think would be great for us to understand what's available. Because,
we were, as councillors, actually offered places on the mental health issues course, were we not?
But I just think a workshop to start off with, and there may be an annual reminder from the HR team. Councillors, just remember this is available to you. Here's the phone numbers.
Thank you for that. Thank you, ladies. Now do we have a mover and seconder for the recommendation? Yes, Councillor Sholem, and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Sears. I'll put. Oh, so we do. Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. An indicator of the state of a workplace's health is part of the sick leave allocation and how it's being used. How does it compare with previous years over the last 12 months?
Through you, Madam Chair. Councillor Dixon, I'm sorry I don't have that information to hand, but I can provide.
No, that's fine.
That
It's just
it's
a very good indicator
Yes.
of the number of sick days and how it all works out, and is it being overused in comparison to previous years?
Yeah. The stats at the moment will be a bit skew with COVID.
Thank you.
Because we've had to treat things a wee bit differently. But yes, I can certainly
thank you.
access that information. Thank you.
And that will further be compounded by the fact that whereas in the past people may have come to work with a cold, they are now discouraged from doing so. So, yeah. Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thank you. Just picking up on Councillor Kerr's comments, I'd just like us to seriously consider whether it is a workshop or what is the correct format and stuff based on, we've had conversations around adding workshops. So, really what is the purpose and whether we've got a different way of getting that information.
Thank you. I'm now going to put that recommendation at the bottom of page 83. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, ladies. Now, moving on to item 7, proposed extension of the cafe at Westermans to an outdoor hospitality area. I'd like to invite Rachel Stewart to speak to that, please.
Madam Chair, are you going to disclose that a few of us went for
Two of us had morning tea there, yes we did, but I don't think that makes us conflicted.
No, not conflicted. We did our homework, we did a site visit.
We did a site visit, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Kia ora koutou, councillors, and just a quick welcome to Paul and Kylie Langford at the back here who own Cafe Westermans. So I just thought I'd just run through this report very quickly. So it's not on the screen, there it is. So you've all had a site visit, so that's useful. This is the existing outdoor area at Cafe Westermans. It was created back in 2000 when that street upgrade was undertaken. Really good location for the cafe, however, it has got 2 large trees and the existing snake light plus a crossing to get across the road. So its actual usable space is not as optimal as it could be. So we were approached from the owners of the cafe to see what we could do, whether we could consider removing one of the olive trees that would give more space, which was a possibility. But what we actually looked at is, was there further opportunity given the popularity of the cafe and the size of that outdoor area? And you can see the relatively small size of it in that photo. And also they currently use down the street as well. So what we actually looked at and spoke with the owners regarding was, could we utilise some of the existing taxi stand bays? And the first thing that we did was do an occupancy survey with the parking team for 2 weeks to see actually how often those taxi stands were used. The results were actually quite surprising, that in fact they get used very rarely. Often at night, but very often just 1 taxi at a time, if that. And we had it confirmed from the buses and the eyesight that this is not used for buses to stop either. So the proposal in front of you enables the creation of a larger outdoor dining area that will provide us with enough room to put the planter boxes, which mirror what we've put in the rest of the Eat Street. This is just round the corner from Eat Street, so it meets with the revitalisation plan. And it also means we get to keep the olive tree, so we don't need to get into discussions about setting precedents relating to the removal of trees in the city centre. So just at sort of a high-level view, it will be extending it into one of these taxi stands here, and then it will just provide that visual link round to the 100 East revitalisation area that we're moving into this year. We've actually got some planter boxes that we've got available now that have been just waiting for the outdoor area for breakers, but that's just waiting to see what is happening with the sale of that building. So we're ready to go on this one if councillors endorse this recommendation.
Councillor Sholem.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your report, Rachel. I'm quietly very excited about this. I think it creates, as you say, a really lovely visual link and introduction into the east side where we've been doing so much work. I'm also thrilled to see potential development happening in the East 100 block. You know, we've had this beautiful revitalisation of East 200, but it would now be great to bring it more towards the heart of the city. I have 2 questions. My first one is, I noted in the report that the taxi companies hadn't yet weighed in at all. Have we heard anything since?
No, so they've had 2 emails each plus a follow-up phone call, and then the person that you speak to is actually the one that takes the bookings for the taxi, and they say just send the email. So I think I've done as much as I can, and maybe their non-response can be taken as they've got no objection to it. Because in the email I said that we had done the occupancy survey, and that I didn't anticipate that it would have any impact on their use of the area.
My second question is just regarding the fact that this is technically a reallocation of budget within the revitalisation plan. I guess my only hesitation is, will this mean that something that we've already consulted on in that revitalisation plan now not be able to proceed as a result of the reallocation of budget?
No, so I see this as part of the 100 Heritonga East project that is funded in it. It's part of Westerman's building, which has got a double frontage, so fronting onto the 100 East. And the proposal that we are moving forward with the 100 East is the curb build-outs really are restricted at the moment to outside breakers. And so there will be sufficient funds in that 100 East fund to fund this project.
Fantastic, thank you.
Councillor Watkins.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I have two questions, and through you, if I may just direct a question to Paul. Paul, is the issue the olive tree, or is the issue you haven't got enough room for tables and chairs? So if the olive tree went, that wouldn't really solve the question. Okay, that's fine. On my second question, just to officers, when we do things like this, make provision for outdoor dining, and associated businesses put their own tables and chairs out, is that a license solely for that establishment's customers to use, or is it for public to use? What is the actual?
Yeah, so that is licensed for that business to use.
Okay.
And so they are responsible for putting the tables and chairs out and bringing them in at night.
So if somebody walks along the road with a sandwich from round the corner, they're not entitled to sit in that area?
Unless that is allowed by the owner of the business.
Well, I just wondered what our licence conditions were.
So we're licensing the business to have that as an outdoor dining area for their business. But what we are doing down the street, so you'll notice in the 200 block, there's a table that's not associated with any business, and that's where we're encouraging people can just stop and sit and not associated with the businesses.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Redstone.
Thank you. Thank you for your report, Rachel, and having been one of the site visitors just before lunch, I'm very supportive of the change. I've just got a question about the planter boxes and whether the calculation, I guess, of how much room they take up as opposed to how much extra we're giving them.
Yeah, so they sit really nicely just right up against the back of the curb, and so together with the ones that are down in the 200 block, they don't take a significant amount of space, and they've got the added benefit of actually providing some shelter to people sitting on the inside of them as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Nixon.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, I've got a question relating to taxis. I'm reasonably familiar with that. I have been seen there a few times over the years, and then a few more. I guess the first question is, where's the next alternative taxi stand? And before you answer that, is there anything to stop taxi? Because most of the taxis I see there are simply dropping off and picking up. They don't seem to sit there the way they do other taxi stands. Are they able to use the short-term park across the road? It's right behind the clock tower there. Is there anything to stop a taxi pulling in there to drop people off?
I'm unsure of the answer of that. I presume so. It's a short stay.
That's what I would have thought.
I think they're just P5 or P10s across there. But there will still be adequate space. We're just proposing to take one of the taxi stands, so there will still be two or three spaces there for them.
I mean, I think the plan you've got, I'd be loath to see the olive trees go, to be honest. I think it's part of the ambience that, exists in the area. And I often sit in that little outside piece. It's quite nice there on a on a suitable day. So, do we need to move it now? Are there more questions? Oh, sorry.
We have more
Whole lot
questions.
more. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Corbin.
Thank you. I'm supportive of the proposal and I'd like to see the olive tree retained. But my question is on the broader revitalisation of the CBD and whether there is any information or data on how revitalised it's become through people in the CBD, how many more people, what times of the day or night, etc. So that's my first question.
So do you want to answer that now? So there's some interesting figures coming through and we might need to start presenting them back to you in a formal way, but I know that we have had a research company working with us on the NZTA Innovating Streets proposal that we are doing, and they've had cameras up looking at how the 200 block is being used since those first stage activations have been put in. And just the increasing amount of pedestrians into the area. So I think we can probably, through you, Madam Chair, put together a report that actually starts to bring all this data back. That's not just pedestrians. It's vacant buildings, a whole lot of things that we can data we can bring back to you.
Well, that'd be great, thank you. And it leads to my second question, whether with the revitalisation the taxi stand is in the right place and whether there might be a better place within the revitalised CBD for the taxi stand.
Councillor O'Keefe.
I support this. Can I assume that this goes ahead? You're going to pull the chairs and tables away from the windows? Or? Is that right? That doesn't come away?
Thank you. Councillor Watkins.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Look, just to comment about the planter boxes. You know, the new ones that we have in Heratonga Street East are great, but with the greenery growing in them, it's probably a de facto facade, now about 1.5 metres high. Westermans, both above and below, is arguably our most magnificent building in the CBD. And the mere dynamic of seeing people sitting at those tables and you drive past and you look into that great window and people dining in there, that's a piece of our magic. And I just ask us to think about what would happen losing that vista and you drive past and just see the top of people's heads above a green hedge. So I just add that. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly, and we can take that into account. So the planter boxes are 600 high. And so in the 200 block, in consultation with the owners down there of the businesses, that we get the plants and cap them so we have a maximum of 1 metres. But we can certainly talk to the owners of the cafe and just either have a different hedge plant in those ones or keep it trimmed to much lower.
I just think the whole facade from footpath up is probably the most incredible facade we can make. Anything that blocks that.
Thank you. Mayor Hazelhurst.
Thank you. Thank you. Just support the recommendations. We're encouraging indoor-outdoor dining, and I think this is a wonderful opportunity to extend the opportunity for people to dine outside. As Councillor Watkins said, our most magnificent cafe in town and magnificent building.
Thank you. Councillor Redstone.
I'd like to move the recommendation.
Thank you. And Councillor Shollam to second. Thank you. I'll put that recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? No? Carried. Thank you. And moving on to the next item is item 8, the enhancement of the Cornwall Park Bird Aviary.
Thank you, Chair. Again,
Madam Chair, I'm actually happy to move this.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Lawson.
And may I speak to that?
Yes, feel free.
I think this is a really pragmatic approach. I was very excited to read this. I think this is a way of getting most value out of our investment. It sees the aviaries enhanced for most of the birds. Visually, the greatest area is enhanced. And most importantly, those two large birds are not going to have their lives changed again. So I just think it's a really great outcome, and I'd like to thank you very much for it.
Thank you. Councillor Sholem.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wholeheartedly agree. While I'm sure my children will not be happy that the birds won't be returning, I think they'll be happy to hear that we can make the other aviaries bigger and better. So, as Councillor Kerr said, it's a pragmatic way forward, especially as the intention of council is not to replace those birds when they pass on. So it doesn't make sense to put in costly infrastructure for two birds that won't be around when my children are older.
Thank you. Councillor Sears.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I'm very supportive of this decision as well, and I think that Mate and Stevie Nicks need to be the winner in this conversation, which they are. But I did want to just confirm with you, Rachel, there are some photos around of the parakeets with the stripped breast, and I just wanted you to confirm they are not pictures of our current birds.
Yeah, I can confirm that, and I'll just quickly go through background that I'd put together. So I asked the SPCA in order to put everyone's mind at ease to visit Mate and Stevie Nicks on the weekend up at their foster home in north of Auckland. And this is the photos that came through after one of their Northland SPCO officers visited them. And so that's them. You can see that they very much do not have but plumage.
Yes. So just to follow up, Madam Chair, just to say I think it would be lovely to be able to share these photos out on our social media so that people, particularly children, can be aware that this decision is really based around not just around cost and in the future, but the actual fact that the birds are in a place where they're very happy.
Thank you. Councillor Dixon.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Also very supportive of the recommendations. But just a question, and it's probably of officers. We had 1,800 responses to the petition online. Do we differentiate where they come from? Because they sure wouldn't be 1,800 from Hastings.
Perhaps I could comment, councillors. We haven't done that exercise on this petition, but at the current number. But we certainly did it at the earlier stage when I reported back to you briefly some 3 or 4 months ago. At that stage, there were a number that weren't here in Hastings. It was probably pretty evenly split between Hastings and also Napier, the wider New Zealand and overseas. So it's but I guess in comment, that's the nature of social media these days and how we have to deal with it.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to make that point that we have to take in mind where these come from.
Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thank you. There seems to be a little bit of bullying that goes on in that aviary with Chucky. And so I'm just wondering or wanting to know, have the rest of the birds been asked if Chucky's allowed into the main cage afterwards?
For access and counselling. Councillor O'Keefe.
Just a quick comment, Madam Chair, at the risk of being ostracised by my fellow councillors. Is it time to shut it down? Is it time that we moved on and let these birds fly free and wild as God intended them? Another discussion for another day, perhaps.
I would say, as probably the councillor who lives closest to Cornwall Park, that is a considerable focus for our young people. Every day there are families there looking at, and it's been historic, it's generational. And some of you, long-standing residents of Hastings, will remember being taken there as little children. It's just a focus.
It's seen as the norm,
It is, it is.
but it shouldn't be.
Councillor Redstone.
I'm pretty supportive of this. I personally don't like birds in cages. I'm opposed to it, but having said that, the birds have been in the cages for a long time, and so there's no real option for them. So I'm pleased to see that the partitions are going to be taken down, and just wondering what sort of free flight area that would create.
Did I put that in my?
You probably did, and I've probably missed it.
So enclosure 4. So enclosure 4 is 100. That's square meters. So I'm not sure of the free flight length. Sorry, I thought I put it in the report.
Oh, well, perhaps later we could just get an idea of that. But as I say, I am supportive of the recommendations, and I'm pleased that those two big birds have gone. The other question I had, Rachel, this is directed at you, I think, will the rewiring of the cages prevent people from poking food through? Because I've seen a number of people poking cheesels and other unhealthy options through the wire.
Yeah, so we're working with the designers of the Palmerston North Aviary and with Vet Services and SPCA to make sure that we use the right wire for the improvements.
Thank you. Have we got a seconder for this?
Just about to reply that, but we do have another question.
Just following on from the really great idea around storytelling on social media as to what's happening with these beautiful birds and that they're fitting well. I also wonder if we could possibly look at some signage in the Aviaries, mainly because we will have out-of-town visitors and those who don't spend time on social media who will love to know what's happening with our birds. So if we can include photos too, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
I think we had a mover for that motion, Councillor Kerr. A seconder, thank you, Councillor Redstone. I'll put that motion, all those motions, please, those recommendations, all those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you, carried. Thank you, Ms. Stewart. And, oh, that's right, you're on again, item 9.
So the purpose of this report is to obtain a resolution to authorise the Chief Executive Officer to enter into a conditional agreement with Play Centre Aotearoa to occupy up to 1,000 square metres of Duke Street Reserve. So you'll recall that the Play Centre lease, and just to give you an idea of location, this is the existing Cornwall Park Play Centre up in Cornwall Park. That lease expires in June this year, and we've been working since then with Play Centre Aotearoa on different options on how we could facilitate a new facility, either working with them to share the enhanced existing tea kiosk on Cornwall Park or to relocate to a different facility. They've explored all their options, and their current preferred option is to pursue the feasibility of a new facility on Duke Street Reserve. We've explained to them what they need. They will need a non-complying resource consent because a play centre is a childcare facility on a council reserve. They'll also need a building consent, and then they will need a lease from us to occupy the land. So what Play Centre Aotearoa have asked is an indication of council's willingness to lease this land before they go to the financial expense of engaging architects and applying for necessary consents. Duke Street Reserve is not held subject to the Reserves Act, but as per our district-wide management plan, we will treat it as if it's a local purpose reserve, and that's because it has already got community facilities on it. It's got the Scouts Club on it. We have delegated authority to issue leases for play centres on local purpose reserves without consultation, and as I said, because it's already used for community purposes. However, what we recommend is that the Chief Executive be authorised to enter into this agreement with Play Centre, conditional on some quite strict or specific conditions that include that is up to 1,000 square metres, location to be approved. The resource consent that they apply for must be notified to enable consultation with neighbouring properties. And obviously, once they have obtained a resource consent, or if they obtain a resource consent and building consent, then we will grant the lease to the land. So I've just highlighted on here just so you can have an idea that the highlighted box there is 1,000 square metres. So it would make sense for them logistically or practically to locate the Play Centre somewhere in this region near to the Scout Hall to make use of existing driveways and access ways. But that will all come out of their feasibility work when they start working with a designer and an architect. That's the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very, very good solution to a problem that we really had. So congratulations to the office for working this one through. It's going to allow them to have a purpose-built facility that they never had before. It was very much a makeshift facility. That's what they used. It will allow them additional parking. And if they could talk to the scouts and the groups, they may well be able to share a playground alongside it, which would be ideal. So more than happy to move the recommendations.
I'll second that.
Thank you, and thank you, Mayor Hazelhurst.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I support Councillor Dixon and Councillor Keith, and I think this is a really good outcome. It's one of the options that we had discussed with our local Play Centre group, Cornwall Park, and it's really exciting actually that Play Centre Aotearoa have come forward and looking at an option for them. In the interim, if this is a project that's going to take a period of time, do they have a temporary home?
So we will be considering, it is likely, we need to work out, we're working on the concepts with the community at the moment on the existing Play Centre home at the tea kiosk.
Mm-hmm.
Once we have worked through the options that we will bring back to council, together with detailed design and costs, that will then determine a program of works of when we will likely be able to get in and commence the upgrade of the tea kiosk. And if it is pushed out towards the end of the year, which we think is likely given difficulty in finding contractors at the moment, that it may be that council will consider letting Cornwall Park Play Centre stay at the tea kiosk until the end of the year.
I think, yep, thank you. I'm comfortable with that solution. I think that's a good way forward, and just to keep them moving on this project. Thank you. Having to support the recommendation.
Councillor Sholem.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just echoing our Mayor there, I think, however we can stay pragmatic as we have done to date would be great to see. And I really do want to recognise the work that you personally have put in, Rachel, in terms of working extensively with this group of people who are really passionate about what they've got there, and all of us want to see the best result. So thank you for the effort you've put in. And yes, please do keep coming back and talking to us, particularly if there's any chance that building will be left unused for a period of time. I really would like to see us offering it to the Play Centre if that's the case.
Councillor Sears.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Rachel, the conditions are due for satisfaction by 31st of March 22. The idea is there's a year's space now for that process to go through the process of design and costing and applying for consent. This isn't I think that's great, there's a year's period there, but if there were for some reason it was to take longer, I'm assuming then that's an open-ended conversation to come back to extend that at our
Yeah.
end if need be.
Yeah, and those, I gave them the opportunity to set that time frame. They suggested less than that, and so we've pushed it out a little bit just to give that space. We know how long things take to get designers and architects working on things in detailed design. So they're happy that that's achievable.
Thank you.
Thank you. We had a mover and a seconder for the recommendations on page 114. I'm going to put those recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, Rachel. And we now have Kirsty to talk to us about item number 10, which is to do with the Hawke's Bay BMX Club.
Tēnā koutou. This report I'm bringing to you is on behalf of the Hawke's Bay BMX Club. So they currently have a lease with council on Remains Drive Reserve, and they're wanting to develop a junior pump track, and so they're asking for an extension on their lease area of approximately 1,800 square metres. As you can see on the photo at the top, that's in that circular triangle area just as you come into the park. It's largely unused. It is used a little bit for access, sometimes by recreational services, but there is also alternative access next to the sports field, so it won't be preventing access around that side of the park. And the club is intending to fund it through grants, and so what they're wanting from the committee is a approval to extend the lease so that they can begin applying for grants and see whether or not they can actually fund this project. And they will be coming back with a plan to officers to make sure that we're happy with that there's not going to have any impact on other reserve users and services, etc. in the area. So yeah, I'll take the rest of the report as read. This is a photo which gives you a different perspective of the area. So if you have any questions.
Thank you. We do have some questions. Councillor Watkins.
Comment, or do you just want questions now?
Either or, actually.
Yeah, look, I totally support this, and I just congratulate this group taking their particular sport and expanding it in an area which is out of conflict with other users. So I think what they're proposing here is spot on and totally support.
Thank you. Councillor Nixon.
Yeah, well, I was going to pretty much say the same thing. I mean, it's been a great amenity, cost us next to nothing, really cost us nothing. I'm going to move it because I don't think it needs a lot of discussion.
Thank you. Councillor Sholem.
Very happy to second. I think this is a wonderful initiative and a piece of land that's really kind of cut off from not being used right now anyhow, and will bring a great deal of community good. So very supportive of it.
Thank you. Councillor Sears.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I'm supportive as well, although I do note that we are losing car parks, quite a few car parks. That's a question, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, through you, Madam Chair. It's the red circle's probably extended a little bit further than what it's at. So we're not touching any car parks because all the car parks are needed, particularly for the pump track as well as the sports field. So we're not losing any car parks. So sorry for any confusion on that one.
Okay, thank you.
It's better. They're going to lose part of the pump track. That's all right. No, cool.
Thank you. We did have a mover and a seconder, and so therefore I'm going to put those 4 recommendations on page 122. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, Kirsty. Now, Aaron, you're on.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just a couple of remarks before I actually start the presentation. It's interesting the effect of COVID and the government funding is starting to have on our accounts, and you'll see that shortly. It's quite remarkable. The second thing is you just see in the last week or two how it almost looks like we're starting to have a two-step economy, one which seems to be going very well, and then there's a rising underlying effect of maybe COVID actually having a longer term impact than we're really expecting. So yeah, I think in the next few months it's going to start to come out more and more. Okay. In terms of the accounting result itself, as you can see there, we've had a $13.6 million favourable surplus as at the 31st of December 2020. Pretty much driven by the revenues there, which you see of $11.8 million favourable, and also lower expenditure of $1.8 million there following through. Revenues, interesting. We've had a couple of big items that actually probably exacerbating or expanding what you're seeing there as the variance. One is the $7.7 million of the first tranche of funding for the Three Waters projects, which the government has given us. We've also received $3.15 million worth of NZTA subsidies, which is standard, but again is not in the revised budgets. Those two amounts are push that variance up quite significantly, as you can see. In addition, the revised budget, which you see there, that's compared to, also includes $7.3 million worth of funding for jobs for Hiratonga, which is currently being worked through. I think the total value for that is $9 million, and we will be completing that, I think, sometime in May, from what I understand. Also, we've received funding of $1.2 million for the Tarbert Street subdivision, and Hawke's Bay Museum storage funding, I think from Napier City Council, wasn't it, for $1.5 million. So that's all flowed through into the accounts that you're seeing in terms of revenue there. Just a couple of other things. All of that I have mentioned is all capital related and will be affected by capital expend, so it won't show up in the operational fund accounts, but it will show up in the capital side of things. And also the other thing is, in terms of more operational standard BAU type revenue, there's still effects that are being felt from COVID in terms of the parking revenue due to some of those warrants that aren't being charged and that sort of stuff. And also Learn to Swim, which was affected by, the fees were affected by the COVID restrictions. Expenditure, which is $1.8 million under or favourable, however you look at that, that is pretty much lower due to lower contracting and expert advice type costs, which are around $1 million under budget for this time of year. It's expected though that that's really around timing, and when the capital projects and that sort of thing kick in, that's when that spend will start to even out, and we're not expecting to see such variance in those areas towards the end of the year. Finance costs are $820K favourable as well. With the additional government funding that we've received, obviously what that means is that we don't have to actually go to market and borrow debt funding. Our requirements are a little bit lower from a cash flow point of view as well. There are also a number of unbudgeted but approved spends, such as the municipal project, the additional $5.5 million that council approved for that, and of course the Hiratonga House, which the move from Hiratonga House and the associated costs that have kicked in with that. Capital spend, this is a really big number. As you can see, we're around 12 million short of our capital spend for the year to date, which is around 50 odd million, and we have 41.6 million. You can see that the total number, the annual plan number was originally 100 million, And you can see that revised budget is now sitting at $146 million. Basically, that's made up of, that additional amount is partially made up of $30 million of carry forwards from the prior year brought through into the current year. Also, you've got some significant government fundings, that provisions that are also built into that budget. The $9 million for jobs for Hiratonga is actually in there as well. So it really has boosted up that budget that you see there. Just on requested carry forwards that are likely to go out of this budget here into next year, at the moment that's circa of around $42 million currently of capital projects that are likely to be moved into next year. Just as a bit of a forward-looking, forward look, we've done forecasts that offices completed in February of this year, and it's come up. It just gives us a better outlook of where we think we're likely to arrive at the end of the year, and give us any warning if there was an issue. What that table shows is the rating result across all areas of council versus the budget there. And the green columns show the rating, the general rate versus the targeted rate. Of course, the targeted rate portion of any surplus or deficit is ring fenced, whereas the general rate can be used in a more flexible way. Before the whole of council, before the interest savings, basically what that shows is a negative 79k deficit. That's not too bad when you consider a couple of things. That's an $80 million budget that you're attempting to land on pretty close, which is in a sense is good that in that we are spending what we have rated for. The second thing there is that there are some absorbed costs in that number that we actually haven't released the contingency for, which means that we've got that up our sleeve as well. So it just gives us a little bit more upside there. And then you can see that we've got the interest savings that are looking like around 1.3 million, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slide as to why. And then a whole of council requirement surplus of 1.2 million at that point. Of that, 1.1 million is at this point looking like it would be general surplus, and 109,000 for targeted rate, which would be ring fence. Treasury, just a couple of things on this. The first is that at the moment, council have external debt of 185 million and $40 million worth of term deposits on our balance sheet. So a net sort of number of about 145 million. What we just wanted to show here was where you can see those savings which are against budget, which tend to be predicated in earlier budgets, the level of interest rate we charged. This shows our cost of funds from early in June of 19 right through to now, around 18 months worth. And you can see that cost of funds is just dropping and dropping and dropping. And what that is it means that obviously it's cheaper for council. The debt is a lot cheaper. That says the old swaps that maybe were taken out 10 to 15 years ago now mature and drop off, and any forward contract swaps that are coming on are at a cheaper rate. Plus, on top of that, our Treasury advisors, Bancorp, we followed a strategy where we've ridden the elevator of dropping floating rates down, and we've just ridden that floating rate rather than trying to fix, which has meant that we've actually captured all of those gains as the interest rate markets have dropped. That's a good thing from council point of view. The discussion we've been having with Bancorp at the moment is around, okay, so where does the elevator stop and come to a bottom? And of course, it's very hard to predict that bottom. Now, you will have seen probably in the news of late that there is some discussion around inflation starting to rise and, 10-year yields going up. Bancorp's view of that is that they're tending to look through that, and what they're saying is that actually we don't necessarily believe that the market is right. They're preempting themselves by saying that long-term inflation is going up, because no Reserve Bank on the planet has actually said that. What they have said is that in the next 2 years, inflation will rise, but is likely to drop. And as a result, what they're saying to us is you don't need to fix anymore, just stay with the floating rate and it'll work its way through. Just as another proviso there as well, we also have something like $88.5 million of swaps covering our positions as they are. So that's within council policy, treasury policy, which is pretty much 50% of the debt needs to be covered off in that way. So that's where we're at with that. Are there any questions?
Councillor Nixon.
Just one question. It's not interest rates this time. No, not that either. I just want, it's a very ambitious capital budget that we have. 3 months before the end of the financial year. Is there any risk of us losing out on funding because we can't complete the projects within a given time frame?
So I'll comment on certainly where we've taken funding. So $9.3 million for jobs for Heretaunga. I think we can celebrate at the end of April, early May, something that was announced on June the 15th and it's been fully completed within 10 months. So it was absolutely shovel ready. We are tracking well on our land development where we've taken funding for Tarbert Street. As you know, we're a few weeks away from handing over the subdivision and houses being built. We've recently signed off on the infrastructure for the land development at 244 Flaxmere and Flaxmere Town Centre. We're running slightly out by 2 or 3 months, but we've recently engaged with Crown Infrastructure Partners who are coming down to been in Hastings today, I think, and the general view in terms of all the external funding we've taken from the Crown across, which is in 3 broad areas: roading and footpaths, 3 waters and housing. We're absolutely on track and delivering, so we don't have any risk tagged to the conditions precedent on which we took the government funding.
The answer was very much as I expected, but I just thought we needed to get it out there, actually.
Thank you. Councillor Redstone.
Can I make a comment? So I find myself a little conflicted with the favourable revenue stream for landfill. As I also sit on Oamaranui landfill, I sit on Eco Districts, I sit on Waste Futures, and I would have liked to have seen that unfavourable actually. So just like to make that comment.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a mover. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Kerr. So the recommendation. Oh, sorry, Councillor Corbyn.
Just following on from Councillor Redstone. So that landfill situation means we must have under budgeted, or the use is accelerating faster than we want. But I think it does raise issues on the landfill, and whether we're reviewing what's happening there and what our strategy moving forward is. I don't think we need to answer anything now, but I think it does raise a flag. And my second question, 12 months ago we were concerned about consent fees and whether they were matching the expenses associated with that. And while these are very big numbers and the consent fee is small, I think it's 342, 324,000. Is there any assurance that with that reduced revenue, the expense is in line with that?
Yes, currently the expenditure is below budget for building control at the same time as the revenue is lower at this point in time.
And neutral position, more or less?
What was that, sorry?
They're in a neutral position?
Yes, it's slightly favourable. I do believe as at the 31st of December. I can give you an update subsequently.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I thought it was a very, very good report, and I was pleased to see the forecasting in there.
Thank you. Now, we did have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation on page 145, so I'm going to put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Now, moving to item 12. Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. While the presentation's been switched over, just a quick introduction. So this is the fourth version of this report, I think, that we've presented to you. And as we communicated when we started out on this journey, it would be iterative and an improving process as we went through it. And that's hopefully the case as you've read through that. So you know, quite a lot of information in there. Purpose of what we thought we'd do today, previously at Ops and Monitoring, we've sort of taken you through a bit of a highlights reel across the organisation. Change of approach this time, and we're sort of obviously happy to take questions on anything that may pique your interest in the report, but more of a sort of a deeper focus in one area this time around, and that being housing. You would notice in the report itself, there's quite a bit more information in this space than we've previously supplied. So Mr. Cameron's going to take you through a few slides. We have got three wise men of our housing and development team to answer any more technical questions here in the chamber, if you have any.
And if I can just add, this report is intended to be an overview of everything that has happened in our council across the broad spectrum of our council activities. So I have asked the staff whether it's possible for those of you who access your council papers as per the hub, to actually be able to access a hard copy that you can keep on hand for the next 3 months until you get another one of these, because any query or question that you get asked by a constituent, the answer is really supposed to be in here. It's supposed to be authoritative, and it's supposed to tell you everything that you as an elected member need to know about what is happening in our district. And if it fails to do so, then you need to tell us, because we can actually access the information that you require. You know, each cycle there will be some additions, there will be some fine tuning, but eventually we will get to the point where it is authoritative and comprehensive.
Madam Mayor? Madam
Yes.
Mayor, Madam Chair.
Yes.
She didn't hear.
No delusions of grandeur.
I'd just like to add to that. We come to the council table almost with two roles, one being representative, and like you say, we can use this to answer queries from our ratepayers. But the other part is we're almost directors of a business, and this is the document that should give us security that we're doing our job well. So for me, example, I have questions regarding our tenders process. I should be able to find it in here, if not, ask the team. So I just would like to endorse your comments. This document becomes our, not quite our bedside reading matter, but it sits beside our telephone, because that's where the advice is, down to what street upgrades we are doing, and any issues regarding that. So absolutely support you.
Thank you.
Just by way of some opening context, there have been some pretty significant announcements today on the housing front in sort of four broad areas. I'll start with the thing that I think is probably most relevant to us, and that is a whole lot of infrastructure financing that's going to be made available by the Crown. We've seen the benefits of that, obviously, in terms of the 4 land developments we're doing. So I think, quite exciting to think that we might be able to position to get some more of that, certainly for the segment of the housing market that's quality and affordable homes for whānau. The second area is changes really around the investors in terms of extending the bright line test and what investors can't now sort of write off, which we'll see whether that has any sort of dampening effect. Thirdly, some changes that are about making it easier to for first home buyers to access deposit assistance, and the fourth area, which is again, pretty significant, billions of dollars that have been allocated to Kāinga Ora with some changes in their mandate that are reducing it from just being completely commercially sort of focused, so giving them the ability to acquire and operate with a slightly different mandate. So, yeah, some fairly significant announcements by the government today, and I guess as we always will, being a partner in terms of our place-based approach, we'll be looking to, as it relates to Kāinga Ora and the infrastructure funding, looking to make sure that Hastings is well positioned in that regard. But we'll get I'm sure you'll be able to access the general media information on it, but we'll look to get out as quickly as we can just a summary of those changes. Over to you, Mr. Cameron. I think it was,
how's that? That's better. We'll just quickly go through the highlighting council progress in the Where We Live area of strategic objectives for council, which is pretty much the adoption, or you adopted recently, your medium and long-term housing strategy, and we're in the council as an organisation is now entering the implementation phase of that strategy. Actions are, there's 26 work streams in the strategy, so some of them actually fit within the BAU operations of council, and some of them are bespoke projects within themselves. If you want to, there's quite a bit of in-depth information on this actually in the body of your report, and if you want to probe some of that this afternoon, if I can't pass the exam and answer your questions, I've got sort of 3 specialist officers there on the side of the room that should be able to fill any gaps. So the first slide here, that's actually the vision page out of your recently adopted strategy, which is what I call your operational strategy to put some more meat on the skeleton around your LTP objectives. So if you think back to your LTP that you've adopted for consultation, one of your 8 strategic areas of priority is essentially a safe and satisfactory and affordable housing solution for all segments of the market, so that all of our community can live as they should be able to in a modern society in a safe and healthy home. The key premise of the strategy is it acknowledges that to tackle your housing, and I think it's a fair term to use at the moment, housing crisis. We have over 2,000 people not living in satisfactory accommodation solutions at the moment. To tackle that very complex challenge, it needs to be tackled on a number of fronts, and that's some of those fronts council's more involved in as a lead agency. And if you reflect back to the strategy, council was actually the lead agency in 17 of those 26 work streams, and we have a supporting role in the other ones. But I think this page just shows that to resolve our housing crisis over the medium and to longer term, that's dealt with by adhering to our responsibilities under your national policy statements regards urban development and protection of our soils. So I think there's clear messaging there that you have to contain as much as you can your urban footprint. And I suspect the tension underlying the policy statement is government saying, look, be smart, you have to protect your soils. That's your medium density and other solutions, and make use of the right tracts of land. At the other policy statement, which on the face of it can seem contradictory, is that as best we can, council has to try and facilitate a supply of residential and commercial land and have what they call a 20% inventory. So that's, in simple terms, that's trying to ensure that your supply tracks slightly above your demand, and that will, I expect the thinking behind that is to try and de-stress the price tensions, because there's pretty strong appreciation both in commercial land and residential land, and it's actually the land component that's driving the larger proportion of the unaffordability of homes. It's the appreciation in land values rather than the cost of the actual building. It's a greater proportion contributing to your unaffordability. But So the key thing in that vision is that we have to operate on a number of fronts, and we can't do it alone, and we have to operate with our other agencies and partners. The next one. So I've pretty much covered that. Just reference to progressive toolkits there and suppliers guide. So another area of work in council is just acknowledging some of the work that came out of your COVID response last year, was that we acknowledge that council is a major influencer in the economy in terms of procurement. So there's obviously substantial investment both in the delivery of infrastructure into our zones. The Waipatu project's a key example. So we're using those projects and the major investments that's going into them to achieve our wider objectives around employment outcomes and training outcomes. So, and again, that's a theme through your medium and long-term strategy. Next one there, not surprising, and Mr. Faulkner publishes with Mr. Clues pretty regularly updates to the residential and commercial development sectors. Just updates on our consenting loads, availability of land coming on, and resource consents going through the system. I think the key message in these slides, if you look to the right-hand side of the equation, looking at 2019, 2021, you'll see there's large spikes in both in consenting and in building consents, and it's council has traversed the fact that since we've been keeping records, we've issued the largest number of building consents, circa 500 for residential in the last 12 months. I think the previous high was circa that 400, so we're sort of tracking 20% above what we ever have been. And the other key message, I think, out of these slides is because council is not generally a major landowner, and that we're a regulatory agency and we zone land, we have to be, to meet our objectives under the policy statements and to play our part in addressing the housing crisis or challenges that we face. Council needs to ensure that we are efficiently utilising all the tools that we have in terms of zoning land and it being available for market, that we're doing everything that we can do. And as the regulator, and working well with the supplier side of the equation, which of course is your landowners, and further down the track, the people that actually do the developments. But the key message here at the moment is it's a hot market, there's high demand, there's rapid uptake in land, and the pressure will remain on council to facilitate its responsibilities under the policy statements in terms of land supply around your zones. And I think the pressure at the rate we're going is going to be on us for at least the next 3 years, possibly 4. Next one down. So if you look into your report, there's just updates on the residential land supply, how we're going in terms of the land coming to market and the land that's currently on the market. This slide represents one page in your report, which is the smaller areas, and then the next one is our major development areas, Northwood and so forth. Do you want to add anything to that, Mr. Faulkner, in terms of how we're tracking supply demand?
Yeah, so what I'm seeing and experiencing and being told by the development community is it's very busy out there. They don't see it slowing, and they're very desperate to keep the wheels and the developments underway. I guess by way of update, the Arataki, Northwood, those developments are nearly fully subscribed to. Linton Stage 2, Flaxmere, you could say Tiawonga Downs are more active. We've just received the first consent for the Brookvale subdivision, Stage 1, which is for 6 lots. And the developer plans to submit their Stage 2 following that Stage 1 approval.
Kairanga, Howard Street, Iona, we're pushing on and doing all we can. We have started our infrastructure works to partly service that Iona development area, coming down Campbell Street, Porters Drive and Middle Road. And as you will be aware, Howard Street, we're working through that land acquisition process, so hopefully that provides a general overview.
I think just as I think most of you will be aware at a big picture level, with the rate at which resource consents and building consents are going out the door, and a forward look at land supply. The conversation that we had to postpone this morning, but it's coming up on Thursday, is how do we start to think about this strategically over the next period of time, because there is some potential real pinch points coming around sort of land supply that we need to, you need to work through and make some decisions on about how we might approach that strategically over the medium term.
Michael, would you be able to talk to the councillors about Kāinga Ora being able to consent their own work and what effect that will have on our workflow?
Yes, so that's a very recent development in terms of Consentium, which is Kāinga Ora has been accredited as a building consent authority and able to issue their own building consents and do their own inspections, with some caveats around land with natural hazards. But what it should mean, if nothing else, is that given the significant volume of work that Kāinga Ora has been doing here and is forecast to do with government's purchasing intentions that's been announced, it should take some of the pressure out of our consenting system.
So just to conclude, Madam Chair, so I just draw Council's attention to the strategy that we adopted whilst I was on leave. It's actually a very good strategy. I can't claim any credit for it because it was written while I was away. So but the 26 work streams in it, and the 17 that Council is taking a lead on it, there's some very complex bespoke pieces of work, plus the obligation for us to do our business as usual very well. So the officers are putting the project management in place around the strategy to make sure that we're working very well internally. There's going to have to be good traffic going up through the subcommittees under your strategy and policy committee, just to ensure that the governance is over in real time, how we're going, and giving that ongoing direction to the officers. The council groups are going to have to continue to work very well together, and there's probably a good 10 or 12 external organisations that council is going to have to continue to integrate very well with, because it's as the vision page in the statement says, this has got to be tackled on a number of fronts, and just council's role in trying to facilitate sufficient supply of green fields sections is a complex field in itself, as you found in the council meeting last week, and that's only one of about 8 areas that we're operating in. So it's a good coordinated effort over the next 3 years.
And I guess stating the blatantly obvious through you, Chair, is that for all that we are making progress, and I think the fact that we've had the highest level of activity for a quarter of a century in Hastings, and we're seeing more activity in segments of the market that we haven't seen previously, it is still really sobering with what our sort of community's facing today. And I think I was reflecting on, 2 years ago I arrived in Hastings, and the median house price in February 2019, when I started with council, was $430,000. The median house price for the month ended February 2021 in Hastings is $770,000. The median rent's now over $500 a week, and with 2,000 people on the public housing register, in Hawke's Bay, 1,700 living in motels. It's as urgent as it's ever been that we actually turn this strategy into action, because you know, those are unfortunately the outcomes that many of our whānau in our community are still experiencing day to day.
Thank you. Councillor Nixon.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I mean, they're all very exciting plans. I think they're great. You know, we've been through that period of lack of sections to build on, and we're certainly doing a lot about it this time. I guess the thing that just worries me a little bit is I tend to see the economy as a bit like the ocean, full of waves, some big, some small, some patches of rather rough water from time to time. And I just wonder what process we have for really keeping our finger on it, because you can only be in a boom for so long. They never have lasted, never will last. But I don't know how or what process we have to try and keep our minds focused on what might eventuate.
I think, Councillor, so during this process and over the last 6 months, the executive and the officers working in these areas we've become acutely aware that we need to have good quality real-time, or what I call enterprise information, which enables us to, obviously keep a handle on how we're going internally in council, but more importantly, maintain a real-time view of what our environment is like. And I use the word real-time because if you go back to our council meetings this time last year, the forecast for where we're meant to be now are the exact opposite of where we actually are. So I think that's, to me, a 6 monthly forecast or whatever is no longer relevant in these extraordinary times. So a key part of the strategy in this space is identifying better ways of how we can maintain that real-time understanding of the key drivers of demand. And we need to understand the key drivers for what's affecting the shortage of accommodation supply, what's the makeup of our immigration, and what are the demand demographics. I was in some interesting discussions this morning that there's potentially quite a few 3-bedroom houses coming on, but there's a substantial demand for 1- and 2-bedroom houses. So that's an answer to your question. I think it's the sourcing and maintenance of accurate information which allows us to maintain that good quality real-time view of where things are actually at.
It might have been a question, but I was really just interested in a response to the general comment I made, because I don't have an answer either. I'm just interested that we are keeping tabs on it.
Thank you. Councillor Watkins.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I was just having a discussion earlier this morning with Nigel, and we're accepting of pressures, current pressures and forward pressures that might be here for another 3 or 4 years from all sectors across our community. And I was just reflecting that all those pressures have an effect right here on this council. I want you to think of ships in the modern era. They have a thing called a plimsoll line. And that says that when you put enough in the ship and it sinks to the plimsoll line, that's the safe mode of operation. You go past that, the risks start to multiply. And so we all want to see all good things happen, and I certainly do too. But I just want to be conscious to say, for this council, where is the plimsoll line and where are we in the water at the moment? Because all these things coming at us, it's more pressure, it's more weight in the vessel, and I just want to put that on the table that I'd love us to start defining in certain areas where is the acceptable line that we are capable of, producing and doing the things necessary, and where is the danger line where we could be exposed either in staff pressures, financial pressures, a whole lot of other pressures. I'll just put that out there.
Oh, if I could just, through you, Chair. I think when you think it's, today, a year ago, I think Sandra and I were sitting in regional council office with mayors and chief executives listening to an announcement from the PM that in 48 hours we were moving to level 4 lockdown, as a year ago today. And it's been a heck of a year for all of us and for our community as we've responded to, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of opportunity. We've done pretty well in terms of the opportunities that we've been able to take on board for our community. But it's also been in a context that you all know as we do, and I feel it as the chief, where it's been a heck of a lot more activity than what we thought we'd be doing a year ago. Also with some judgments that we made, again with a lot of uncertainty around minimising the rate's impact on our community, so taking a couple of $1 million of operating costs out, and so that has created pressure, but in a way that I think we're all motivated to turn up and do a great job for our community. But going forward, it is going to require us to, as officers, give you as governors really good advice about, what does that look like? What are some of the, risks and choices that you have? And some of that's going to be coming at you pretty quickly as we talk about, it's no surprise that when you kind of look at record activity levels in commercial, industrial, residential activity, that pressure you see, you don't have to walk too far. You see that pressure in regulatory and planning. You see the pressure in assets and infrastructure. I'm constantly, blown away by what the organisation's achieved over the last 12 months. You chuck on top of that, well, yeah, just added in, $10 million worth of roading and cycleways and footpaths, and had it all delivered, and we're still cracking on with all of our infrastructure program. But at some point, like when we talk about some of the choices that you have to make. So, for example, if we want to accelerate and get ahead of some of the growth stuff around land supply, well, we're not going to do that with existing levels of resources. It's going to require us to give you some good advice, but as governors, make some decision about, well, what is your appetite? What is your risk, appetite? What is the level of investment that you might want to make? Because, for as much as I'm proud of what the organisation's achieved in the last 12 months, can't squeeze anything more out of it in terms of thinking that we can just keep responding to more and more growth, because it will, we'll use Kevin's plimsoll line analogy. We'll get ourselves into a fair bit of bother.
Councillor Kerr.
Hopefully a quick question. We've put out several contracts for tender. Many of them are just in the offers back 1, 2, 3 or 4. Just want to know that we are out there actively marketing, trying to get as many organisations to respond to our offers.
We're talking about tendered work? Yeah,
tendered work. So on this report. So there's 2s, 1s. There's an outstanding where we had 10 tenders for, that's for a playground supply panel. But often it's just only a handful of organisations. I appreciate some of our work is quite unique, but just want to make sure that we are actively trying to get as many people as we can to tender for the work.
Yeah, we are, but if we're using market intelligence at the moment, if you want to look at, construction and civil infrastructure, you've got a market that is hot, a market that doesn't necessarily line up with how public institutions have to operate. The amount of firms that are saying, hey, actually, we haven't had to tender for work for the last year. We've got people coming to us to give us work, begging us to, as public institutions, we can't do that. So when you have firms, and so, and this is the real world stuff the officers are dealing with every day, going, well, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to spend 200 grand dealing with your 800 pages of procurement requirements for a job when I've got the private sector falling over themselves to sign me up. So there's some real world tensions out there at the moment in the market. We'll be talking to you at some stage just about the final run-in on the implementation of the last components of the drinking water program. And I've signalled to council we've been in market, and wasn't going to get into the detail here. The reality right now is where we are getting tenders, people are putting in for work, they're not guaranteeing price beyond 7 days. The level of uncertainty now around material costs, COVID supply chain issues, these are the things that we're going to continue to grapple with for the foreseeable future in front of us. So there's some really big challenges out there.
Sure. Thank you, Nigel. So really the risk is not that we're only getting a few tenders. The risk is we may not get any.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Now, we have two recommendations on page 159. Could I have a mover and seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Barber. Thank you, Councillor Lawson. I'm going to put those recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Carried. Now, afternoon tea, even though we haven't finished this part of the agenda, if everybody can be back here at 3:30, please. Right, to reconvene at item 13, I'll call upon Mrs Evans to talk us through our Lagoima requests. Mrs Evans.
Sorry, I'm not quite ready. Yeah, so I'll take the report as read. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to take any questions.
Yes, could I just ask a question? I'm wondering, in terms of satisfying these requests, do we actually charge for the service?
No, we charge in very rare cases, and what we could charge for doesn't actually reflect the cost of doing the work. So the really expensive part of complex requests for information are the sourcing the information and finding it. We can't actually charge for that, but we can charge for officer time for collating the information, but that's really only part of the cost. We also have to put a public interest test on the information request. So requests from the media we generate and other requests of general interest we can't actually charge for. So we do charge, but it's actually a very small amount that we actually recoup.
And therefore, have we quantified what meeting these requests actually costs us? Because I note that we have an extraordinary number of requests from one party, and I'm just wondering whether we know what that has cost us.
We don't actually account for the amount of time we spend on requests. But I was talking with General Counsel about this earlier, and we recommend that we reckon that probably it's $100,000 to $150,000 which is spent in officer time on dealing with official information requests.
Thank you for that. Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You virtually answered my question, but that's okay. How long would it take a normal officer to process a Lagoima request? So that's the 150,000. I was quite surprised when I read that a third of them had come from one person. When you've actually got the fire in New Zealand, you've got the media and all of those also requesting as well. But when one ratepayer has a third of them, that.
Thank you. And Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, no, I was just noting the same, that there's predominantly, well, in fact, I think there's 26 or 27 from one party. What is the cost on that? And it's not, I don't think it's, well, there's an element of cost if we're also having to get external advice, but it's also the time and energy expended.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I notice our legal counsel's not here, but I was just wondering. Oh, that's a good lead. He might like to come to the table to answer this question. At what point does a Lagoima request become vexatious? I know you've covered it with me before, but I would appreciate everybody hearing it, please.
Through you, Madam Chair, you've phrased that question very well, in that the requests are vexatious rather than the source from which they come. And the threshold for that's set quite high, which reflects the public benefit that's gained through transparency and openness that this process forms a part of fulfilling.
Thank you. We have two recommendations on page 159. Thank you, Councillor Redstone, and thank you, Councillor Watkins. I'll put those two recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. Thank you. And now can I direct you, as the last item of business in the public part of our meeting, it's entitled Supplementary Agenda, and it relates to the draft proposal for Food East controlled trading organisation. If you can access that. Sorry? Yeah, okay. So Mr. Cameron is going to speak to that for us. And you will see on page 7 there are 2 recommendations. So, Mr. Cameron.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, Madam Chair. So, councillors, this matter continues from your council decision at last week's council meeting, as Hastings District Council proposes to enter into what's called a council controlled trading organisation, and the combined local authority ownership of that proposed organisation will be over 50%. Obligates council to do a special consultative process with our community. So officers have prepared a statement of proposal, which is attached to the report, which is the basis document that we'd like to run the consultation on with affected and interested parties. You'll see the document is still in draft. It's got to go for graphic design and a final edit, but the substance of the paper won't change at all. It will just be colouring and some, if there's any spelling mistakes there. So, other than that, I take the paper as read. Apologies from Mr. Neville, he's away from work today. And Madam Chair's already drawn your attention to the recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Watkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you. And a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I'm going to put those 2 recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary? Carried. Now, we have a recommendation to exclude the public, so I'd like to move it and second it with that, please. Thank you, Councillor Redstone and Councillor Dixon. I'll move that and then I will ask Mr. Allen to explain the reason for that, please. So all those in favour, please say aye.
Madam Chair, could we just hear from Mr. Allen first, please? Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, so the reason for having these 2 items public excluded is to protect the individual's privacy that are being discussed around these director and trustee appointments. So you can have a full and frank discussion regarding those individuals. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'll put those 2 recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. Thank you. We're now into public exclusion.